welcome to 2011 Studies again. We're looking today at the phrase, unless those days be shortened. This is tied into the 1335. By the way, if anybody's new to this, we're looking at the upcoming year 2022 as an important year to start the 1335 days of Daniel 12. It's blessed is he who waits and comes to the days of 1335. Now in Daniel 12 there's two time frames. There's the 1290 days, and which we're going to talk about a little bit later, and then there's the 1335 days. And I think those are two separate periods of time, and I believe we're in the 1290 right now. And I don't think that takes much to look around and see the activity of Satan today all around. So this is unless those days be shortened. And this is a 4-page study. It's pretty quick. It's going to be a short study unless those studies be shortened. Unless those days be shortened. Mark 13:19. For in those days shall be affliction, such as was not from the beginning of creation, which God created unto this time. Neither shall be. Now that right there, neither shall be, sort of gives room for God's short work into the 1335 days. So that's why I believe that the 1290 comes first, and then the 1335 starting in September of 2022. So the 1335 days, by the way, is September, Trumpets, 2022 to Pentecost, 2026. That's precisely 1335 days. Now there are other years after that qualify, but I think the most important group of years, which seems really significant, is the upcoming 2022. And we'll know once we get in it, because I believe there's going to be, like in Ezekiel when it talks about the waters increasing. It was up to the ankle, up to the knee, up to the loin. Waters, eventually there is waters to swim in. Now those waters to swim in are healing waters, and I believe that's what salvation toward the end is all about. It's about God being magnified, His salvation program going out in a great way, like Matthew 24 declares that it will be the gospel will be going into all the world as a witness unto the nations, and then the end will come. So anyway, this is Mark 13:19. Oh, by the way, another thing about the waters increasing. You notice the measurements of those waters in the book of Ezekiel. It's each measurement is 1,000. So there's 4 times 1,000. Every time in the fourth time, it's when there's waters to swim in, healing waters to swim in. So that's an important aspect of that. The 4 is universal in the Bible. And the 1,000 is like completeness. It's just an encompassing completeness of what's in view in the verses. Okay, so Mark 13:19. For in those days shall be affliction, such as was not from the beginning of time. Beginning of creation, which God created unto this time. Neither shall be. And except that the Lord had shortened those days, no flesh should be saved. But for the elect's sake, whom He has chosen, He has shortened the days. Now, why does Mark 13's language sound familiar with the language of affliction? Matthew 24 also speaks about it. And I believe this is very identical to Daniel 12 as it opens in verse 1 there. Let's see. This is Matthew 24:21. Now the difference here between Mark and Matthew is you have those shall be days of affliction. There's no mention of great there. But in Matthew, and you see that in the Bible, you see that sometimes just a little variance of change from the different gospel writers. Matthew 24:21. For then shall be great tribulation, such was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. And except those days should be shortened, and there should be Matthew 24:22. And except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved, but for the elect's sake, but for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. Okay, I'm getting these verses kind of from memory, and I'm just trying to read them. So here you have the shortening of the days. Now the term of the no flesh shall be saved, that's very tricky, because I mean, you look at the pestilences and you look at what Christ warned against, you wonder, is this really talking about, the flesh of people, just, it's talking about people dying? Or is it saying, is just no flesh shall be saved, just talking about, unless those days were shortened, God's salvation program wouldn't go out in a great way during the 1335 days, and salvation wouldn't happen. The thing is, he does save a lot in certain seasons. You saw that at Pentecost. And I think that's true today too. So from Trumpets 2022 to Pentecost 2026, like I say from Ezekiel, it's going to be just a gradual increase of salvation and until there's healing waters to swim in. And that's an important aspect of the 1335 days. So let's see, we read Mark, we read Matthew. Now, is this language all related, at all related to Daniel 12? And let's see how Daniel 12 opens up. Now, this is double-sided. I got to remember that. Okay, Daniel 12:1. And at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince which standeth for the children of thy people, and there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book, and many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. And they that be wise shall shine as the brightness of the firmament, and they that turn many to righteousness as the stars forever and ever. But thou, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book, even to the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. Now, we've talked about that knowledge, how it's the knowledge of God's Word. And yes, there might be a parallel, the technology and all this going on today, that the technology is like going side by side with God's Word opening up, and technology, the knowledge being increased. I know a lot of people go to that. When they do commentaries, they go to that. Look at all the technology. But that word seriously talks about God's Word being opened up. That knowledge of His Word. And He's the one that reveals this. And it even says here, shut up the word, seal the book, even to the time of the end. Well, we're here. This is the time of the end. We have yet another clue that great affliction was a period of 7 years for Jacob, Israel. Now, this is Acts. What I'm trying to point out here is we mentioned the great affliction, great tribulation in the Gospels. Now, the same word. When you see affliction, tribulation, it's the same thing. Acts 7:11. Now there came a dearth over all the land of Egypt and Canaan, and great affliction, and our fathers found no sustenance. So that's Acts 7:11. Now that mentions great affliction. That's an Old Testament account of great affliction. Now, the reason I'm looking at the shortening of what should have been 7 years is because of that verse there, the great affliction of Jacob's time. There should be a time of 7 years where there's great affliction. Just by the language alone, Christ spoke about great affliction or great tribulation. As Daniel 12 opens up, a time that has never been. And the Gospels mention, nor ever shall be. So what duration of years is this current time of great tribulation affliction shortened by? I believe the answer is found in Daniel 12. In Daniel 12, there are two time periods mentioned. There's the 1290 days, followed by the blessed is he who waits and comes to the days of 1335. Now, 1290 days is 3.531828 years. So that's 3.5 years, roughly. So it's 3.5 years, the time of the shortening of the 7 years of great affliction or great tribulation. I believe it is. I believe that 1290 was pointing to just like a half of what Jacob's trouble was, the time of Jacob's trouble. But also, when you have the language of Great Tribulation, and I know a lot of people want to, put it back from 1988 to 1994, then eventually to 2011 as the 23-year period of Great Tribulation. I do not believe that was Great Tribulation. Now, that could have been an example of just tribulation or affliction, but it was not what the Gospels are talking about, or even in the book of Daniel 12, where they're talking about the 1335 days finally coming. Now, when those come, yeah, happy is he who waits and comes to the days of 1335. So we have the answer right there in Daniel 12. And in fact, when Daniel stands in his lot, in his inheritance, at the end of the days, then we know that's the time of resurrection. That's what the Gospels speak about. That's what Daniel 12 speaks about. And we can rest assured that the 1335 days are very close to the end of time, very close to the return of Christ. So when we pinpoint and we know the days of 1335, which years qualify, we can basically narrow it down. We can just go through the chart and say, okay, 2022 to 2026, Trumpets to Pentecost, is 1335 days. Now there's some other qualifying years, a couple, after that. However, if you study along, now look back on the other videos we've done and how we explain why the 2022 to 2026 is the most highly significant group of years which qualify for 1335 days. Let's see, one of these years, this is just another note. This is kind of, so anyway, 1290 days is 3.531828 years. And when God speaks about 1290 in Daniel, it's a time of Satan's power, and it will come to an end, though. And that's the good news. Everything you see going on right now, it will come to an end. No doubt about that. The book of Joel proclaims that God will be magnified. He will do great things. But before he does great things, he removes the northern, who is Satan. He removes him to a land barren and desolate. Now, that comes, the removing of Satan comes prior to God doing great things. And even when you're looking in the book of Esther, that book there, man, that talks about the whole battle of the kingdoms, where you look at the language of Haman the destroyer, who is an illustration of Satan. He wanted to kill all the Jews in the kingdom, and the reverse happened. He was killed and his 10 sons. So we have and that lot was cast for a whole entire year until it landed on a certain date in Adar. And we've done studies on Adar to show that the magnification of God relates to the month of Adar. And in that story, historical story, that the Jews had great light, or, and letters of peace and truth went out. Now the letters of peace and truth are the gospel going out into all the world. How do we know that? We're going to look at something about the number 127 in just a sec. That number is not found very many places, if any other besides Esther. I haven't seen it, but I have seen it in factors with a greater number involved. So one of these years from 2022 to 2026 may have the storyline of the book of Esther written all over it. But what year would it be? 2022? That's possible. This current year will see the start of the 1335 days of Daniel. There might be a clue in the number of provinces that King Ahasuerus ruled over. The number is 127. So 127 is, how do we see that number show up? In other words, let's see, the years within the 1335 days, it starts in 2022, 2023, 2024, 2025, then we get to 2026. Now those years, you have to see which one is more qualified for the time that God has in view when His short work happens, and that the letters in peace and truth go out. So, which would be the most qualified? Now, if you're talking about the coming of Christ, and when I looked this up, I just put October the 2nd, because I do believe that is the time of Christ's birth in 7 BC. October 2nd, 7 BC to October 2nd, 2026. And that produces 2,032 years. So in 2026, it will have been 2,032 years since the birth of Christ in 7 BC. Now, you have an important number that produces. It produces 742,176 days, or the years, when you're talking about it in years, 2,032 years, it produces 4 times 4 times 127. There's that 127, or 16 times 127. But when you look at 4 times 4, universal times 127, the entire world, or entire kingdom, however you want to look at that, that's God's kingdom. Let's see, the second point would be the letters of peace and truth going forth. This relates to the gospel going into all the world, since God's short work most likely would come after the 1335 days for 133 days, 0.5, or the 1/10 of 1335. Again, go back and review those videos, because I think they're significant. I mean, we've always looked at the Feast of Tabernacles representing the last day. Christ stood up on the last day during that feast and proclaimed salvation. If any man thirst, that is an important aspect of the salvation going to the last day, to the Feast of Tabernacles, in the year 2026. So you have 1335 days, trumpets, September 2022 to 2026, Pentecost, and then another 133.5 days, which will follow right up until right to the last day of the Feast of Tabernacles. And by the way, that's very related to the same time reference of October 2nd, 7 BC to October 2nd, which would be the last day, followed by the last day of salvation, followed by Christ's return. So 133.5 days is a 10th of 1335. That's a very good possibility that would conclude God's short work. And I'll put up the verses for God's short work. Oh, by the way, I didn't go over this, but the amount of days from Christ's birth until 2026 would be October 2nd, 7 BC to October 2nd, 2026 would be 742,176 days, and that produces 144 times 5,154. So it's 144 times 5,154 equals 742,176 days. Now at 144, we've talked about that before, and it's a very significant biblical number. These just certain numbers that God chose. It's really amazing. You know, when you first start studying, you're looking at some of these numbers, and it's like, why did God choose 1290? Why? You know, and why did He choose 1335? I think when we get studying this more and more, when you see the 1290 is 3.531828 years, and you notice that there's a shortening of what is termed in the Bible of Great Tribulation for the sake of the elect, so the salvation will go out in a great way. I think that that's important. That whole thing is very important. So that's it for now. This is a short study. I kept this one short. Anything else? If you have comments, questions, put them below in the comment section. Like and subscribe. The more people comment and subscribe, the more this will get exposed. So more and more people will watch this. And share it. It's like we're what, 9 months out. And if it starts, when we start entering into 2022 September, which by the way is very close to our election time, and there might be a big swing there, a big change happening then. But that's Trumpets, and we've been talking about this for a while. So we got about a 9-month roll-up before it starts. My name's Marty Catuzzo. If you want to email me, it's 2011studies@gmail.com. And that's about it for now. I'll post some more studies as we go in these next 9 months. I hope you're studying along and keep reading the Bible, because God's revealing a lot. He really is revealing a lot in these final years of history. But we've got a cushion of time here. But don't rely on that, because too much is going on right now. Get right with the Lord. Say your prayers. Cry out for salvation. If you don't feel you have salvation, it's very important you do that, because God's going to be saving a great multitude coming up in this, a remainder, so to speak, of in the 1335 days as the waters gradually increase. God bless you, and thank you for listening and sharing this. Thanks. There's one little caveat with this. We just talked about the shortening of the days. Now, it may not be that the time from 1988 eventually to 1994, then to 2011, that 23-year period was a time of great tribulation. But it is 23 years, and it's very possible that that 70-year example of Judah's captivity, then when the king of Babylon basically raided Judah and took him into captivity, that was shortened in our time, the time of affliction. You can call it tribulation, affliction, either one. That was shortened to 23 years in our time. So it could very well be that both periods of time, whether you're talking about the example of Judah going into captivity, which should have been 70 years, but it was 23 years in our time, and you're talking about the 7 years of Jacob's trouble, shortened to 3.5 years, or the 1290 days. So you have two examples of what could be the possibility of those days being shortened, unless those days be shortened. I think that word is curtailed or docked off. I can't remember really, but I think that's what it is. Anyway, so when we're looking at both examples, you have a shortening of the days from 70 years to 23 years, and from 7 years to 1290 days, or 3.5 years. And that really goes along with the times and half a time, the 3.5 years of that. How long? The question was, how long? For a time, times, and half a time, 3.5 years, where Satan wages war against the Holy Covenant, and he wages war against God's people. So that's what we're looking at. We're looking at the shortening of not only now the language is definitely, you would have to stick with the 70 years when you're talking about great tribulation. In fact, the 70 years, it wasn't called great tribulation until it was over, and there was people who remained there, and then for them it was great tribulation. And I'll try to put that verse up. So the language of great tribulation must be followed. Now it applies to the time of Jacob's trouble, 7 years, and it applies to after the 70 years. So we'll put that verse up, and it'll help sort of identify when the Great Tribulation actually happens. So that's it. Thank you.